The first explosion shook the colony like a fist slamming into bone. Screams echoed across the metal halls of Horizon's Reach as the lights flickered and the air became thick with the acrid smell of burning plastic and spilled blood. Commander. Reyes Valoric stood at the center of the chaos, his eyes cold, scanning the attack from the observation deck of the UHS Reckoning. A trio of Apex warships emerged from hyperspace, their jagged silhouettes cutting through the darkness. The hunters had arrived, circling like vultures over fresh prey. "Deploying defensive shields! Now!" his lieutenant shouted. Reyes' voice was a growl. "No shields! We hunt, not hide!" He turned toward the crew, his face set in stone, hands already gripping his weapons. "Target the leadership! Let them know we're not prey. And broadcast this. Let the galaxy hear it. Humans don't run. We hunt." With that, he launched the first salvo, and the world of Horizon's Reach erupted into fire. This opening immediately throws the reader into an intense, action-packed moment, establishing Reyes' defiance, the dire stakes, and the powerful conflict with the Apex Hunters. The dialogue sets the tone for the rest of the story, building anticipation for the retaliation. The first explosion hit like a slap to the face. The sound was deafening, a deep, gut-wrenching boom that shook the very bones of the Horizon's Reach colony ship. Red lights flashed as the ship's hull groaned under the impact, the warning alarms blaring a chorus of panic. Beneath the flashing emergency lights, humans screamed in terror as they scrambled for shelter. Panic spread like wildfire. Commander. Reyes Valoric stood on the observation deck of the UHS Reckoning, eyes locked on the chaos unfolding before him. From his vantage point, he could see the colony ship's distress signals flashing and the Apex warships descending like vultures over fresh prey. Reyes' jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists as he leaned over the console. He didn't need to be told what was happening. It was clear the Apex Accord, the galaxy's most brutal predator empire, had arrived, and humanity was nothing but another game to them. "Launch all fighters!" Reyes barked, his voice sharp. The crew, accustomed to his no-nonsense command, wasted no time in executing his orders. He watched as the UHS Reckoning's fighters rocketed out into space, a blur of sleek metal cutting through the void. Their mission was simple: protect the civilians aboard the colony ship, and if possible, send a message to the Apex Hunters. He turned to his lieutenant, Sergeant Anna Klein, who was already moving with a sense of urgency. "Commander," she began, her voice tight, "we have incoming ships from 3 directions. They're heavily armed." Reyes' eyes narrowed, scanning the enemy vessels through the ship's tactical display. They weren't here for a military conquest. They were here for sport. The Apex species, vicious, powerful, and utterly merciless, had made a tradition of hunting weaker civilizations across the galaxy. They never cared about territory, only the thrill of the kill. And they saw humans as little more than prey. "Don't give them the satisfaction of an easy hunt," Reyes said, a cold fire burning in his gut. He turned to the communications officer, Lieutenant Reynolds. "Broadcast this to the Apex ships. Every single word. Make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with." Reynolds nodded, quickly adjusting the broadcast frequency. Reyes stepped forward, his voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "Apex Accord, you've made a grave mistake. Humans don't run. We hunt. And you'll soon learn why you should have stayed in your corner of the galaxy." He paused for a moment, watching the Apex ships as they loomed larger in the viewports. The enemy didn't respond, but their presence spoke volumes. With a simple flick of his wrist, Reyes issued another command. "Engage at will, all weapons hot." The UHS Reckoning's massive turrets swiveled into place. Reyes knew it wasn't enough to just fight back. They had to make a statement. He'd seen too many species fall to the apex, species far more advanced than humanity, broken by the sheer brutality of the Accord's hunting methods. He wasn't going to let humanity become another notch in their belt. Not on his watch. Outside, the space battle unfolded with a deadly grace. Reckoning's weapons erupted with deadly force, the flashes of energy lighting up the void as laser cannons and torpedoes ripped through the Apex ships. The fighters were locked in a dogfight with the Apex's smaller craft, sleek, monstrous. Ships that were designed for speed and intimidation, but Ray's had something the Apex didn't: humanity's tenacity. The human ships fought with a desperation the Apex couldn't predict. They'd never encountered anything like it. On the command deck, the tension was palpable. Ray's crew worked in sync, each member fully aware of their role. There was no time for hesitation, no room for error. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. "Direct hit on their lead ship," Lieutenant Klein reported. She didn't wait for Ray's approval before issuing the next command. "Target their engines. Disable them." The UHS Reckoning fired another salvo, hitting the lead Apex vessel in its exposed underbelly. The ship shuddered, the bright green glow of its shield flickering out. One of the enemy ships, in its attempt to retaliate, veered into the path of a nearby asteroid field, its engines trailing fire. It was gone in a matter of seconds. Ray's allowed himself a momentary smirk. The Apex were not invincible. The fight was far from over, but humanity had a chance. "Commander!" Klein shouted. "The remaining 2 ships are regrouping. They're preparing a coordinated attack." Ray's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just an attack. This was a challenge. The Apex were testing them, seeing how much humanity could take before they broke. And Ray's wasn't about to let them have the satisfaction of victory. "Prepare the Nova Cannon," he ordered. "We're going to send them a message they won't forget." The Nova Cannon was humanity's deadliest weapon, a massive energy beam capable of slicing through entire ships with a single shot. But Ray's didn't just want to destroy the Apex. He wanted to show them something they had never seen before: defiance. The crew moved with precision as the massive weapon powered up. Ray's locked his gaze on the remaining Apex ships. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Seconds passed like hours, firing in 3, 2, 1. A blinding flash filled the viewport. The Nova Cannon shot forward with the force of a star's wrath, its energy crackling through space like lightning. It hit the closest Apex warship head-on, splitting it in 2 with an ear-splitting explosion. The wreckage drifted, its flames illuminating the surrounding darkness. The last Apex ship, now a frantic mess of evasive maneuvers, turned and fled, its engines firing in desperation. But it was too late. Ray's knew it. The ship had no chance. "Commander," Lieutenant Reynolds said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "the last ship is retreating. We've won." Ray's gaze remained fixed on the wreckage. He didn't feel the rush of victory. He felt the weight of what was coming. The Apex Accord would not stand by quietly after this. They would retaliate. The fight was far from over. But humanity had sent a message. They would not be the prey. He turned to his crew, who had been silent, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. Humanity is not prey. We will hunt, and we will win. The Horizon's reach was saved for now. But as the last remnants of the Apex fleet disappeared into the distance, Ray's couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger war. The battle for Horizon's reach was over, but the war had just begun. Commander Ray's Valoric stood on the command deck of the UHS Reckoning, staring out at the view of the fading wreckage. The remains of the Apex warships drifted like shattered shells through space. But that victory felt hollow. His crew had fought valiantly, but he knew this was not the end. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. Lieutenant Reynolds approached, his face tight with concern. "We've received a transmission from the Galactic Council." Ray's didn't turn. The Council, a collection of mostly weak, appeasing diplomats, had no place in a war like this. But they held power. And whether he liked it or not, his actions had caught their attention. "What do they want?" Ray's asked, his tone sharp, still tinged with the heat of battle. "They're asking for a ceasefire," Reynolds said, hesitating as if unsure how to proceed. "They think we should negotiate." Ray's fist slammed into the console, causing a ripple through the holographic displays. "Negotiate? With the Apex?" His voice was low but fierce. "The Apex don't negotiate. They hunt and they kill." He turned to face his lieutenant. "Tell them we don't negotiate with predators, and make sure they know that." Reynolds nodded, taking a step back, but Ray's could see the doubt in his eyes. Reynolds, like so many others, wanted peace, but peace had no place in a galaxy ruled by the Apex Accord, and if humanity was to survive, they would have to fight, not beg for mercy. "Prepare the fleet," Ray's ordered. "We're taking the fight to them." The UHS Reckoning's engines hummed as the ship made its way toward Earth, humanity's home and the heart of the resistance. As Ray's sat in the command chair, his thoughts swirled. He'd killed one Apex warship, crippled another, but Catharak, the Apex Supreme Huntmaster, was still out there, and Catharak would come for revenge. Ray's had no illusions about the kind of enemy he faced. The Apex were cunning, ruthless, and relentless. But humanity was something they had never dealt with before, and Ray's wasn't about to let his species fall into the same fate as others. The message he'd sent was clear. Humans were not prey. They were hunters. Back on Earth, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency session. A massive holographic table dominated the center of the room, its blue light casting shadows over the faces of the representatives. Humans, Zenthians, Kashari, and a dozen other species watched as the human delegation, led by Admiral Carter, debated their next move. Commander Valeric's actions were reckless, Admiral Leela Karos of the Zenthian fleet said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The Apex Accord is not some small-time empire we can dismiss. If we attack them directly, we will bring the entire galaxy down upon us." "The Apex Accord has brought war to us," Admiral Carter shot back. "The only reason we are here is because Ray's sent them a message. He showed them that we're not going to lie down and let them kill us." "Human arrogance," Karos scoffed. "What makes you think you can win against them? Do you think we are invincible?" "I think we're alive," Carter replied firmly. "That's more than the Apex can say." "Enough," the counselor of the Kashari cut in, his ancient voice echoing through the chamber. He was a towering figure, his green-scaled face expressionless. "We are at war, whether we like it or not. We need to unite and make a stand, not squabble over pride." Ray's words echoed in Carter's mind. "Humanity is not prey. We will hunt, and we will win." And it was true. If they wanted to survive, humanity had to be the hunters. No one else was going to fight for them. Meanwhile, in deep space, Catharak watched the news of the UHS Reckoning's victory with cold amusement. The Apex Supreme Huntmaster was not known for mercy, nor for failure. The challenge had been accepted, and Ray's Valoric would be hunted. "Prepare the fleet," Catharak said, his voice like the scrape of metal on stone. "Humans will pay for their insolence." His subordinates moved swiftly, sending a signal to the other Apex leaders. The grand hunt had begun. Back on Earth, Ray's plan was already taking shape. He had the full backing of the human military, but the question of how to strike back at the Apex remained. They were scattered across the galaxy, deeply embedded in systems far beyond human reach. The key, Ray's knew, was to strike where they would least expect it. "Commander," Klein said, her voice urgent as she entered the command center. "We've intercepted Apex communications. They're gathering for a grand hunt, and it looks like they're coming for Earth next." Ray's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what we want." "What?" Klein asked, confused. "We hit them where it hurts. The Apex think of Earth as weak, a breeding ground for prey. They're coming here to hunt, but we'll turn that on them." Klein blinked, realization dawning. "You're suggesting we fight them here? On our turf?" "Yes." Reyes said with a grim smile. We're going to show them what happens when you bring the hunt to human soil. As the UHS Reckoning began to organize humanity's counteroffensive, Reyes found himself at the head of a growing resistance. The Apex Accord had underestimated humanity once, and that was their biggest mistake. Reyes' strategy was simple, but bold. Rather than defending Earth passively, they would pull the Apex into the heart of human territory, into a fight they could not win. Using human ingenuity, they would turn their homeworld into a trap. We've been fighting wars for centuries, Reyes said to his team in the war room. We know how to make the enemy think they're winning, and then we make them regret it. The room was silent as his words sank in. The Apex had never fought a war like this. It would be a battle not just of strength, but of wits. As the crew nodded, the weight of what was coming settled in. Earth was about to become the battleground, and Reyes Valoric was ready to lead humanity into a war it would never forget. The Apex were coming, and Reyes would be ready. The UHS Reckoning hovered just outside the atmosphere of Vorax Prime, a world known for its lethal predators and savage terrain. It was an inhospitable place, forests filled with carnivorous plants, jungles teeming, with beasts that could tear a person apart in seconds. And yet, it was here, in the heart of Apex territory, that Reyes Valoric intended to strike. We're right on the edge of their hunting grounds, Commander, Lieutenant Klein said as she stood beside Reyes on the command deck, her gaze fixed on the planet below. Apex ships are bound to be close. We need to get in and out quickly. Reyes nodded, his eyes scanning the holographic map of the planet. The Apex had turned Vorax Prime into a showcase of their power, a living, breathing arena where they tested their best hunters. They had no idea humanity was capable of breaking their game. We're not just going in for a strike, Reyes said, his voice firm. We're going to show the Apex we can play their game. We hit them where they think they're strongest. They'll never see it coming. Klein looked at him, puzzled but trusting. And what exactly is our plan? We infiltrate their main facility, sabotage their breeding grounds, and make sure every Apex hunter knows the humans have arrived. We're going to ruin their prized hunt. The Apex didn't just kill for food, they hunted for sport, using a variety of captured species as prey. Humanity had learned this through intercepted communications, and Reyes knew the value of sending a loud, clear message. The Reckoning's drop pods deployed with a mechanical hiss. Inside, a handful of Reyes' most trusted soldiers, including Klein and Sergeant Jarek, were already suited up, their expressions serious but determined. They didn't speak much, each man and woman focused on their mission. The drop would be dangerous, but Reyes had trained them well. The pods hit the surface with a jolt, shaking the crew awake as the thick, humid air of Vorax Prime rushed in. They stepped out into a dense alien jungle, the foliage vibrant and thick, with the scent of unknown life. Massive trees, towering over 20 meters high, stood like silent sentinels, their roots winding across the ground. The forest was alive with distant roars and calls, predators announcing their presence. "Move out!" Reyes said, his voice clipped, sharp. He led the team, his eyes scanning the jungle. He could feel the weight of the place, the silent, lurking danger that came with every step. But Reyes didn't flinch. Fear wasn't part of his makeup. The team moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows of the trees. They were hunting Apex now, not the other way around. The facility they were aiming for was hidden deep in the jungle. It was an Apex breeding ground, a complex of high-tech structures buried beneath the canopy. Here, they bred and trained the creatures used in their hunts. Reyes' mission was simple: destroy it. Stop the flow of Apex warriors, ruin their games, and leave a mark they couldn't ignore. The jungle around them grew eerily silent as they neared the complex. It was too quiet, and Reyes knew it wasn't because of the creatures. This was Apex territory, and they were never alone. Every step had to be calculated, every move swift and precise. They had to get in, complete the mission, and get out. Approaching the facility, Klein said, her voice hushed through the comms. Reyes raised his hand, signaling for them to halt. The complex loomed ahead, an imposing structure of metal and glass surrounded by fences and energy shields. Apex guards patrolled the perimeter, their sleek, muscular forms moving with the predatory grace of hunters. But they weren't expecting a strike from humans. "On my mark," Reyes said, his voice calm, composed. The plan was simple. Split into two groups. Reyes would lead the main assault, while Klein and Jarek would sabotage the power grid, cutting off communications and shutting down the facility's defenses. The Apex would be blind, and that's when the humans would strike. "Now," Reyes said, and the team burst into action. The firefight that followed was brief but brutal. The Apex guards were fast, but they were not prepared for the level of precision. Reyes and his crew brought to the fight. They moved in perfect sync, taking down the first few guards with deadly accuracy, but there were more, so many more. The compound was larger than Reyes had anticipated, and the noise of battle was sure to draw attention. "Covering your six, Commander!" Klein shouted, laying down suppressive fire as Reyes and Jarek stormed the entrance. The main door to the facility was protected by a thick energy shield, but it wasn't impenetrable. Reyes shot a quick glance at Jarek, who nodded and approached the panel. Within seconds, he hacked into the system, disabling the shield with a hiss. "We're in," Jarek said, his voice low. Reyes didn't wait for a reply. He stormed inside, weapon raised, and his team followed closely behind. The inside of the facility was just as alien as the jungle outside, metallic walls gleaming under artificial lights. It smelled of chemicals and something faintly organic, like the scent of a lab where experiments were conducted. The deeper they went, the louder the sounds of Apex activity grew. Reyes' pulse quickened. They were close now, and he could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders. This wasn't just about taking down an Apex facility, it was about sending a message. They reached the heart of the breeding grounds, a vast hall filled with towering containment cells. Inside, creatures of all shapes and sizes paced restlessly, their eyes gleaming with hunger. They were the prey for the Apex hunts, and Reyes had come to stop it. "Set the charges," he ordered. The team moved with precision, planting explosives around the central containment area. The Apex would lose their stock of animals, their prized creatures. This would cripple them, and for the first time, Reyes could feel a spark of hope. Maybe humanity could win this after all. As the charges were set, a harsh, metallic voice echoed through the facility's comm system. "Human intruders detected. Initiating lockdown. Initiating purge protocol." Reyes cursed under his breath. The Apex had detected them, and the countdown to their own extinction had begun. The doors began to close, sealing off their escape route. "We need to get out now!" Klein shouted. The facility's alarms blared as the team scrambled toward the exit, the first explosion detonating behind them, shaking the walls. Reyes glanced back, seeing the fireball rise from the center of the breeding grounds. It was working, but there was no time to savor the victory. The facility was collapsing, and the Apex would be right on their heels. The team pushed forward, their path now a blur of gunfire and chaos. Reyes' mind raced. He could hear the Apex roaring closing in. "Almost there!" Klein called out, pointing ahead. And then, just as they reached the exit, a massive blast threw Reyes forward, knocking him to the ground. His vision blurred, but he fought through the haze, pushing himself up. "Commander!" Klein shouted, her voice strained. "We're not done yet." With the charges planted and their mission accomplished, they had made a statement, one that would echo across the galaxy. The Apex had underestimated them. Now, humanity had proven they could survive and fight back. The jungle. Outside was still deadly, but the team was determined. They had made it out alive, and this time, the Apex would know they weren't just prey. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke as Reyes Valoric watched the jungle burn. The explosion had torn through the Apex facility, the Inferno, rising into the sky, a violent beacon of their victory. The team had made it out, but Rays knew better than to think it was over. The Apex would respond. They had to. "Status report," Rays barked, his voice low, sharp. His eyes never left the fiery horizon where the facility once stood. "We're clear, Commander," Lieutenant Klein said, adjusting her comms unit. "The charges worked. We crippled their breeding grounds. But—" She hesitated, glancing at the horizon. "They know it was us. We're marked now." Rays' face tightened. The Apex were no strangers to retaliation, and Rays had no illusions about the dangers that lay ahead. He'd heard the rumors, whispers of Apex grand hunts, where the hunters themselves became the hunted. Humanity had sent a message, but now the Apex would make their own statement, and Rays would have to be ready. "We're not going to wait for them to come to us," Rays said, turning to his crew. "We're taking the fight to them. It's time to find their leader." The UHS Reckoning was already en route to Apex territory, a silent shadow in the void. Rays stood in the war room, his hands clasped behind his back as the crew worked around him, prepping for the inevitable assault. The ship's engines hummed with quiet power, but the tension was palpable. He could feel it in every breath, every movement of his crew. "They'll retaliate," Sergeant Jarek said, his voice deep with the weight of their mission. "And when they do, they'll come for Earth. Not just us, but everything." Rays didn't. Look at him. "Then we'll make them regret it." But the gravity of his words hung heavy in the room. Earth had been the Apex's target all along. Rays had known that. The Reckoning was Earth's only real defense against a threat like the Apex. And while they had won a victory on Vorax Prime, he knew that would be the last easy win. "Commander," Klein said, breaking his thoughts, "we've picked up something. A transmission. It's encrypted, but we're working on decrypting it." Rays looked up. "What's the source?" "Apex. Definitely Apex," Klein replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The screen flickered for a moment, and then the transmission appeared. A series of images and codes scrambled across the screen, finally stopping on one clear image. T was Catharak. Rays' pulse quickened as the image of the Apex Huntmaster filled the screen. Catharak's face was a mask of cold malice, his eyes glowing with a deadly intensity. His sharp, jagged teeth gleamed beneath his lips in a sickening smile. "We have a message from the Apex Supreme Huntmaster, Commander," Klein said, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "He's calling you out." Rays stared at the image of Catharak. The message was clear. Catharak wasn't going to wait for Rays to come to him. He was going to make this personal. The transmission clicked on, and Catharak's voice rang, out in a low, guttural tone. "Rays Valoric, you think you can defy the Apex? You think you can turn our games into a battle? I offer you a choice. Come to Raven's Perch. I will personally ensure your death. If you don't, I will hunt every human you've ever cared for. You've made a grave mistake, Earthling. The hunt has begun, and you are my prey." The transmission ended, the words hanging in the air like a dark omen. Rays' fists clenched, his jaw set tight. He had known it was coming. The Apex didn't just want to win, they wanted to humiliate, to break their prey before the kill. Raven's Perch. Rays' voice was cold, calculating. That's where he wants to meet. We'll give him the fight he's looking for. The UHS Reckoning broke through the dark expanse of space, the engines roaring as they neared Raven's Perch. It was a planet unlike any Rays had encountered before. Steep cliffs, jagged mountains, and a barren surface that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was as hostile and unforgiving as the Apex themselves. "We've arrived," Klein said, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped the room. Reyes surveyed the planet on the screen, noting the sheer cliffs and deep ravines. This is it. This is where they want to die. We're taking the fight to their turf, Jarek said, voice tinged with determination. We're not just going to survive this. We're going to win. Reyes met his gaze for a moment before looking at the rest of the crew. They were all in. Every one of them was ready for this fight, and Reyes could feel the strength in their resolve. Let's show them what humans can do, he said, his voice resolute. As the reckoning descended into Raven's Perch's atmosphere, the tension mounted. The ship shuddered as it passed through the thick, storm-churned clouds, the rain pouring down in sheets. The landscape below was harsh, rocky, jagged, unforgiving. I'm reading multiple Apex ships near the surface, Klein said, eyes glued to her console. It's a trap. They've been waiting for us. Reyes' face hardened. Of course it was a trap. The Apex didn't play by any rules. They made them. But they had underestimated humanity once, and Reyes wasn't about to let them do it again. We drop in 10, Reyes ordered. He turned to his team. Get ready. We're not here to fight their soldiers. We're here to kill the man who's been hunting us. The drop pods hit the planet's surface with a resounding crash. The jungle around them erupted in chaos. The Apex soldiers emerging from the shadows like specters, but they weren't the targets. Not yet. Reyes and his crew had a different goal in mind. The hunt was personal now. They moved through the rain-slicked landscape, each step deliberate. Reyes' mind raced as they closed in on Catharak's position. He could feel the heat of the trap closing around them, but he had no intention of being caught. He'd been in traps before, and he always got out. The sound of Apex soldiers charging through the underbrush grew louder, but Reyes was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for humanity's future, and he would make sure the Apex paid for underestimating them. Stay close, Reyes ordered, and when we find him, we finish it. They moved deeper into the heart of Raven's Perch, the Apex closing in. This was it. The moment they would either become prey or take their place as the galaxy's apex predators. And Reyes was determined to ensure it was the latter. The storm that raged on Raven's Perch only added to the chaos. Lightning cracked across the blackened sky, illuminating the jagged peaks and deep valleys below. Reyes Valoric's drop pod crashed into the earth with brutal force, shaking the ship's frame as it slammed into the rocky surface. The thunderous roar of the storm masked the sounds of their descent, but it was the silence that followed that was most unsettling. For a moment, everything went still. "Move, move, move!" Reyes shouted as his pod's hatch flew open. His boots hit the ground with a solid thud. The rain was pouring down, drenching him instantly, but he didn't care. The hunt had begun. Lieutenant Klein, Sergeant Jarek, and the rest of the crew followed closely behind, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the wild terrain. The cliffs surrounding them towered above, creating a natural barrier that made escape impossible. This was Catharak's domain now, and Reyes had come to take it back. "We're at the coordinates," Klein said, wiping the rain from her visor, as she glanced up at the dark, foreboding peaks ahead. "The apex should be near." "They're always near," Reyes muttered, his voice tense. "They're waiting for us." He glanced around, noticing the cold, jagged rocks jutting from the ground like teeth. The landscape was as hostile as the creatures that called it home, but Reyes had faced worse. "We make our way up," he said, pointing toward the cliffs. "Catharak will be at the top, and he's not expecting us to get that close. This storm is our advantage." The team moved swiftly, their boots crunching. On the rocky ground, the sounds of the storm muffling their steps. The rain soaked them, but they pressed on, climbing higher into the mountains. Every step was calculated. The trap would be sprung soon, but they had to be ready. As they reached a narrow ridge, Reyes held up his hand, signaling the team to stop. The faintest of movements caught his eye. Apex soldiers, clad in dark, sleek armor, moved below them, their shadows barely visible against the rain-soaked earth. The apex were close, too close, but they hadn't spotted them yet. "We take them out quietly," Reyes ordered. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We can't afford to alert Cataract before we're ready." Reyes led the charge, his soldiers following his lead with silent precision. They moved like shadows, closing in on the first group of apex hunters. Reyes's blade flashed in the rain as he sliced through the first guard's neck, his motion smooth and quick. The soldier didn't have time to scream as he fell, his body limp on the wet ground. Klein, Jarek, and the others followed suit, eliminating the apex soldiers with deadly efficiency. They were trained for this, silent, lethal, and relentless. It wasn't long before the apex were nothing more than lifeless bodies scattered across the rocky ridge. "Clear," Klein said, checking her weapon. She wiped the rain from her face, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We move on." Reyes gave her a sharp nod. "Let's finish this." They continued their ascent, climbing higher through the storm. The tension was thick in the air, every sense heightened by the constant threat of an ambush. But Reyes felt it now, the cold weight of what was to come. Cataract wasn't just any leader. He was a master hunter, a predator at the top of the food chain. And he wasn't going to go down easily. The storm raged on, and soon they reached the summit of the cliff. The wind howled, tearing at their clothes and filling the air with the taste of ozone. Through the fog, the silhouette of a massive high-tech structure emerged, a towering fortress at the peak of the mountain. "That's it," Jarek said, voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "Catharact's lair." Reyes didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his weapon raised, his eyes locked on the fortress. This was it, the end game. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were hunting Cataract, and the apex huntmaster had no idea what was coming for him. They moved quickly toward the entrance of the fortress. The security was minimal, the apex clearly believing their position to be impenetrable. It was almost laughable. Reyes's team had been through worse, and they had survived. They would survive this. Inside, the facility was dark, cold, and sterile. Holographic screens blinked on and off, their bright light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The place smelled of metal and dampness, a stark contrast to the storm outside. But it wasn't the facility that concerned Reyes, it was what lay ahead. "This is where it ends," Reyes said, his voice low, determined. "Cataract is here. We take him out, we win." But even as he spoke, the feeling of unease lingered in the air. Something didn't feel right. The apex had lured them. Here, this was all too easy. The fortress was too quiet. It was a trap. "We're being watched," Klein muttered, her hand on her weapon as she scanned the dark corners of the facility. "I know," Reyes replied, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "It's a trap, but we walk right into it. We kill Cataract and destroy the apex." And then, without warning, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, and Reyes's heart raced. He could hear the hiss of energy shields powering up and the heavy clanking of footsteps approaching. Apex soldiers had emerged from the shadows, surrounding them in the pitch black. "We've been waiting for you, Reyes Valoric," came a cold, echoing voice. "Cataract." Reyes's grip tightened around his weapon, his body tense as he prepared for what was to come. The apex huntmaster's voice was laced with contempt, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "You think you can take the galaxy from us?" Catharact's voice boomed, his presence looming larger than ever. "You are nothing but prey!" The darkness pressed in on all sides, but Reyes felt no fear. This was the moment. This was the fight he had trained for, the one that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. And he wasn't going to lose. "We're not prey," Reyes said, his voice a low growl. "And this is where your hunt ends." And with that, the final battle began.